Thanks for having me here today. I'm here today to talk about public art because I believe that if you want people to ask themselves the tough questions about what their community means, we have to introduce public art into that dynamic. Public art confronts us as we make our way throughout our day. We form opinions about this art and we share them. Everyone in the particular neighborhood has to come in contact with this art and to create an opinion about it. They have to say either, this helps my neighborhood be what I want it to be, or this is stopping my neighborhood from being what I want it to be. And because of this, public art is one of, if not the most single tools we have to help reinvigorate and recreate our communities in our cities and towns. The kind of art that I'm talking about here, by the way, is not occasional art. It's not the sort of art that's created to commemorate someone or something, although that's certainly part of the discussion about public art and perhaps an interesting antecedent to this talk. But what I'm talking about when I say public art is any kind of art that appears in public. Murals, performances, ghost bikes, traffic death roadside memorials, these are all public art. Traditionally, though, public art is seen as something that's good for you, something that one sort of trots school children by for their education. But good art, good public art, is effective not because it gets people who are already talking about art, but rather because it confronts people who live in that neighborhood and forces to ask themselves, is this what I want my community to look like, to be? Public art brings us together as a community because it forces us to question, sometimes after years of sleepy, indolent acceptance, what we want our cities, our towns to look like, to be, and to do. Good art, in short, makes us discuss as a community what we want our community to say to ourselves and to say to outsiders. Oil City, Pennsylvania is a small town that was at one time the center of the petroleum industry in the United States. It was decimated when those petrochem companies pulled up stakes and moved away. Now the city chose to invest in public art and artists, and this has changed and reinvigorated this Rust Belt city, but that came later. After the corporate pullout, it wasn't like there was a lot of good competing ideas out there. It wasn't as if there was so much noise that the signal couldn't get through. Instead, there was a flattening of ideas, an apostasy of ideas. The old-timers believed, and many of them still do, that big petrol is going to come back and save them. That this idea that the industry is going to come back again. And the refineries are going to open up once again. And there will be lots of money once again. And people will strut down the streets in suits and fedoras once again and see movies for a nickel. And everything will be perfect. It'll be just the way it was. We can move forward by going backwards. But when I talk to young people in this community following the economic downturn, instead what I heard from them was, meh. The community had for so long told talented young people that they had to leave in order to succeed. They had to leave and never come back. There was, and there still is, this policy of sort of benign banishment. These talented young people, these people who excelled academically, these young people who came from privileged middle-class families, they were told that to be successful, they couldn't come back to this place, and thus they never did. And thus they were unable to ask and to answer the question of what they wanted or what this community should look like. And the young people who weren't academically motivated, or whose skills weren't valued, or who came from lower class income families, well, they stayed. And their thoughts about the area weren't treated seriously, or maybe they lacked the tools in order to express these ideas. And eventually, they became stagnant. And when I talked to them, and when I asked them, what would their community have to do? How would their community have to change in order for them to want to be there? They would say things like, nothing. It needs to be gone. There was this nihilism. It wasn't a case of, I need to be gone. I need to go somewhere else where I can be successful. Instead, it was this idea that the whole city needs to be wiped from the face of the earth. And that to me is horrifying, right? That's so disturbing because that's saying, in other words, there is nothing that ties me to this place to which I'm from. The natural beauty doesn't tie me to this place. The people, my people, don't tie me to this place. There is nothing here for me, is what these children were telling me. And this leads and this led to a spiral of drug use, of drug abuse, of alcoholism and poverty, and not exactly a hopelessness, but a nihilism. This unwritten policy of benign banishment and neglect had created an entire city of hanged men from the tarot deck, people who were neither here nor there. When the New York Times sent a stringer to Oil City to write about the effect of Quaker steak pulling up stakes, a recently laid off worker said, people had faith in the company, that it would stay and take care of them. She said, it's taken away their hope that the company that started here would stay here. The new CEO responded in the same article by saying, the people in this town don't know how to win. They are their own worst enemies. But not everyone in Oil City agreed with this assessment. And in 2006, Joanne Wheeler was hired as the director of the Arts Revitalization and Artist Relocation Program. And I and my wife were living in the area at the time, and I remember seeing the ad in the newspaper, and I thought, this sounds like a fascinating job. I thought, maybe it's time for a career change. And then I started thinking about the responsibilities and the challenges and the pay. And I realized this could never work out. They were looking for overtime work for part-time pay. But Wheeler, to her credit, attacked it. And she attacked it with insight. And that insight was that Oil City and its people were not the problem, which had been said for so long. Instead, she believed that Oil City and its people were the answer. And the answer wasn't to remake Oil City into a mini Portland or a mini Austin or a mini Madison or a mini Ithaca, but to use art in the city to define it as much as the tanker trucks had when they had been rumbling through the downtown. And so the headquarters of the movement became an old, beautiful, at that point slightly decaying, Victorian building called the National Transit Building, which was split into studios and artist space. And then Wheeler started inviting in artists from all over the nation with special mortgage terms arranged from a local bank. But then, instead of just allowing the project to be another insular incubator for artists, she started from the very beginning by bringing the art out of the transit building and into the streets. And suddenly, everyone had something to talk about. Suddenly, there was an Oil Region Indie Music and Arts Festival. The first year it was in a park at the edge of town. But the businesses and the locals went and saw it and said, no. We want this in the downtown. This is how we want people to see and understand our city. A digital film fest sprang up, a bluegrass festival, a weekly lunchtime concert in a Vest Pocket Park behind the transit building. Instead of spending all their money on one big public art project, as is the convention today, Joanne Wheeler and her artists created a vibrant, consistent flow of art from the transit to the people. The studios always seemed to be open, and there were always people wandering in and out, sometimes getting furious about what was displayed, other times buying it, but always talking about it, always refining how they saw themselves and how they saw their community. And after about 4 years, Wheeler put together an economic impact statement. And in that time, the city had spent about $85,000 towards the project. The return on real estate, sale, and rental alone had been close to $1 million. But the money was secondary. The most important thing was that art had created a bottom-up instead of a top-down environment where people could see a horizon and write themselves. Wheeler and her artists, along with others, had been able to use art to open up a conversation that no one had wanted to have since the economic collapse. And so my wish is that you will be like these people in your own communities. I want you to create public art. I want you to think about public art, but above all, I want you to talk about public art. Put public art in your toolbox, but don't just enjoy it. Instead, let art be the stone that sharpens the steel of you, your city, and your neighborhood. Thank you.